Welcome back to the Iowa Beef Collective. I am your host, Patrick Wall. We are live here at the Hansen Center again, taping some of the speakers on the program here at the Genetic Symposium. And with me today is Marty Ropp from Allied Genetic Resources. And, when I started to develop the podcast, I had a list of names, and one of the first ones that went on it was you. I knew I needed to talk to you. Still probably my favorite talk at a Beef Improvement Federation in all of the years that I've been going, and it was about pigs.
Thanks, Patrick.
And so I think your background is unique, but I want you to kind of go through your career, and I want you to stop when you get to when the idea hits you that Allied Genetic Resources could be a thing.
I guess that'd be twice.
Okay,
it happened
perfect.
Twice. I'll go back to the first time it happened. And you're right, I grew up in the pig business. We were Chester White breeders. And actually, when I say we, it was a 4-H project gone out of control back in the 70s. And that's when I come to the first time that I thought that Allied Genetic Resources would work. Only it wasn't Allied Genetic Resources, it was something else. Because, and I've just told this story on a podcast the other day, but I was about 15. And I was exporting genetics to other countries, selling commercial boars to people who made their living in the pig business.
Mm-hmm.
And I woke up one morning and realized I'm not qualified to do this. I have no basic knowledge of genetics outside of what I learned at a type conference or what I learned from talking to other people that had pigs. And I said, this model is not going to work, let alone the fact that I can provide no customer service to anyone with the genetics that I sell them.
Sure.
No data, no nothing. So that was the first time that I began to say, we need to have something more. I guess that's what I would say as far as not just Allied, but we need to have something more. Later on in life, of course, 1998 happens, pig business collapses. Half the people that I know that are in the hog business lose everything, which was a seminal moment and a change in my thought process from this used to be fun and it's not fun anymore. And moving on into the beef genetics business, which was I was blessed to be kind of accepted, changing gears completely.
Mm-hmm.
Changing into there, and then after we'll go to the second time. And that was working for American Simmental when I realized that working for a breed association in the position that I had with no more resources and help than we had and our limitations, we could not provide meaningful customer service. And it was going to be very difficult to tie genetic improvement, which breed associations are good at promoting at least,
mm-hmm.
With all the other segments of the beef business, which is where all the dollars are generated,
Right.
And amassed to come back and flow through the system to pay for genetic improvement. And so at that point, I left the breed association very cordially and said, I want to do more, and I want to do more than I think that I can do in my position as a director of commercial programs at a breed association.
Awesome. So talk about kind of the start of Allied Genetic Resources. Did you just start with one breed and then you added breed after breed? Who was your first customer? Where did you get started and to where you are now, which I know it is essentially exploded into much bigger than it was when you got going. But talk about the early days of Allied Genetic Resources and how you got going.
Well, thanks, Pat. That's nobody's ever asked me that. First of all, I'll tell you that I'm cautious by nature. And so I spent 3 or 4 years talking to people about whether Allied Genetic Resources, which didn't even have a name at that point, whether that was wise or not, whether or not that was something that they thought could work. And also at the same time, would that be something they were interested in participating in?
Mm-hmm.
And I'll drop back just one notch back again to my experience to pig business. There was a service/genetics/industry type of business that was independently run that I was envious of when I was a young person. That was out of Indiana. It was an outfit called Premier Genetics.
Oh, sure.
And so I watched that as a young person. And anyway, I took some of those ideas, some of those thoughts, bounced them off lots of people, asked them about whether or not they might be interested in participating. And then I put together a list of folks that I was interested in working with in the short term who might be interested in financing a startup. And really the reason that we put together the member-owned LLC, or I put together the member-owned LLC, was because I worked for a breed association. I didn't have any money.
I know the feeling.
If you want to dive off a diving board into water that you don't know if there's any alligators in, you need to at least have enough money to where you can get out of there. And so those folks helped me fund the initial startup of one of the first of our 3 businesses that we've put together. And with the idea that we could provide them customer service, customer recruitment and retention, and some advanced programs that maybe they couldn't get anywhere else.
So, give us a 30,000-foot view of what today's customer at Allied looks like. What do they get from you?
Okay. Two customers. The first customer is our owners, of which now between Allied Genetic Resources, All Beef, and Allied Feeding Partners is about 100 owners of those member-owned LLCs. So that is a customer. But our primary customer is the larger beef industry. The first step in that are the commercial customers of the seed stock providers that own our businesses and that we're accountable to initially. Past that, then, the feeder cattle marketing sector, the cattle feeding sector, packing sector, and hopefully at some point all the way down the supply chain into more coordinated kind of activities, because we've started with something and tried to put something together of value, dress ourselves up for the prom so that maybe somebody would ask us to the prom. But the commercial cattle business is our ultimate customer, however far down chain you want to talk about that. If we do a good job of servicing them, then our member owners have the best chance possible of being successful in their independent businesses.
So you're buying genetics on a customer's behalf for an owner's behalf?
We do that. That's one of the things that we do.
Okay.
That's one of the things we do. We've got a feeder calf marketing business. We've got a growing data business through Data Genie. We've got some genomics professionals now, Dr. Marty Ropp and Dr. J.R. Tate. They manage our genomic improvement programs. We've got a sale management and promotion business where we do old school push forward marketing,
sure,
to try to take a better product and proliferate it farther into the industry. We do a lot of consulting and we're busy. It's good. Life is good. We're busy.
Excellent. I visited with you briefly at BIF, I believe it was last year, and you were talking about the labor shortage, and you had an idea about how to help solve that. Tell the audience what your idea was, because I was fascinated, because I think it will actually work.
We're still, it's very fledgling, and we're fighting through lots of kind of startup issues. But the effort and this totally comes out of the fact that when you work with ag producers and even ag systems every day, almost 7 days a week, you realize that there's only 2 things they agree with. One is that the government is not their friend. And the second is that they can't find help.
Yep.
And they certainly can't find help that's trained or partially trained.
Yep.
And as we look out in the future, 5 and 10 years from now, that supply chain of labor that used to be solid is absolutely drying up. And we have to find some ways. We have to find some ways to solve our own labor issues, because I don't think anybody's lining up to do it. Some of the programs, government programs and things that are designed now aren't not very functional at building communities and at rebuilding the supply chain of young people, because our rural communities and rural families were the supply chain of young people for agriculture.
Sure.
When we were 10 years old, we could drive a tractor and put up hay and drive a fence post and move a hog around. And when we were 10 years old, we were already partially trained, and there were thousands and thousands of us that grew up on those families. As farms got bigger, families got smaller, fewer families on every section of land, fewer kids, smaller labor force, smaller partially trained labor force. And so my idea was, can we, since that source of labor doesn't exist anymore for practical purposes.
Right.
If we need 1 million more people, they don't exist. And we still have people working in a shop that are 75, 80 years old that grew up on the place in the next house down, and they're still there because they're that committed to agriculture. So that workforce is not going to be a viable solution. So can we look where young people are? Because young people aren't in those small communities. There just aren't any.
Yep.
There more young people graduated high school in my hometown last year, which isn't a huge place, Bloomington, Normal, Illinois, two cities, but more young people graduated high school in Bloomington, Normal last year than did in the eastern half of the state of Montana.
Wow.
And so looking for labor, even though they're great when you can find them, looking for labor in places where young people don't exist is illogical.
Sure.
So let's reach out, encourage young people who I think there's probably more interest in a migration of young people out of particularly the rural urban interface areas where they listen to a lot of country music and they watch a lot of Yellowstone. Those folks are interested in agriculture. They're interested in a different trajectory of life than they're going to get living on the outskirts of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and I think, we used to talk about suburbia. Like that's how cities grew.
Yes.
Now you're talking about somebody not picking up and moving outside to the city. They're moving to Western Montana.
Sure they are.
And they're sprawling across the country. But I think the labor source, a lot of what you're referring to is FFA, 4-H.
Absolutely.
They're the junior national events that are all over my social media page pretty much all summer. There's over 1,000 kids at those. Not all those kids are from a farm.
No.
And there's FFA programs. We market cattle to South Texas to an FFA advisor who we've got connected with. None of the cattle that we've sold there go to juniors that have a pasture. They're kids that joined FFA. They want to show cattle.
What an opportunity!
Yeah, and they'll work just as hard as a farm kid. They're actually more impressionable because they don't have any bad habits or any sort of previous training. But fascinating idea. I hope you can help get it off the ground, and if I can be of assistance, I'd love to help you. But I probably have touched on the labor issue in this podcast as much as any other topic because it's a problem. And we don't really have a viable solution across all of ag that we're like, okay, this is the answer. We just got to get there. We don't have an answer right now. So good stuff. You are our keynote speaker for tonight's event. And, just give us a snapshot of, what's your message for the genetics, I'd call them aficionado, or at least a producer that, pays attention to what's coming at them from a genetics front. What are you telling them?
My message tonight, and I've leaned on this since I started Allied, frankly, and maybe even before that, is our genetics provider, is the genetics industry in beef cattle doing their job? Are we doing? I can tell you from all my friends. I grew up in Normal, Illinois, on a farm outside of Normal, Illinois. Every friend I have raises corn and soybeans for a living. That's what they do.
Yep.
And I can promise their genetic providers have done their job. And all you have to do is watch year in and year out the improvement in seed technologies to realize that their genetic providers have done their job. And I have to ask myself, as genetic providers in the beef industry, are we putting in the effort and the technology and making the kind of consolidated improvement that they are in essentially every other food species, in green beans and okra?
Yeah.
Are we doing the same thing for the beef industry and helping the beef industry create value as the genetics offerings in other food industries are in their industry to help grow the pie, reduce cost, and add value to the products?
I would agree with that wholeheartedly, because I think if there's a common even sentence that a corn soybean producer has told me at about this point in the fall, it was better than we thought. I mean, the environmental challenge that we've given the crop sector, they've always come back with, oh, it's better than we thought.
Yes.
I don't know that the beef producer would tell you that with as much certainty as a corn soybean farmer. So I'm looking forward to the message, and hopefully our listeners will apply what you tell them. But I really appreciate you coming on here. Allied Genetic Resources is something that I have looked to when I'm educating an extension a lot, because not everybody does it. It's a tool, but it's kind of a group of tools, and you've expanded it. You made it go actually more directions than I even knew about on this podcast. So congratulations to you on building it. I know you've done it with some blood, sweat, and tears of your own doing. So good work on you. But thanks for joining us here on The Collective. As always, tune in, subscribe, like us on Facebook, find the Iowa Beef Center. We'll keep bringing these episodes to you weekly, but appreciate Marty coming on. Thank you all at home for joining us.
This institution is an equal opportunity provider. For the full non-discrimination statement or accommodation inquiries, go to www.extension.iastate.edu/legal.